Sup nerds, I'm Tom with Neverboard Gaming, and I'm going to show you how to play Victory Battle Tactics, this game right here. Alright, so to start off, I'm going to explain to you guys how we set up the game. Now obviously I already have the game set up here. We have the two halves of the mat that when pushed together kind of create the game board. There are 7 spaces for you, 3 neutral spaces, and 7 spaces for your opponent. Each player has brought their decks and placed them off to the right side of the game mat. It's kind of the most convenient area. Now you can play with pre-constructed decks or decks that you make yourself. And you may be wondering, Tom, how do you make a deck yourself? What are the rules? Good question, and it's really simple. Exactly 30 cards. No duplicates. That's it. Each player also takes one location card of their choice and puts it off to their left. Now this isn't a part of their deck. This never gets shuffled in. It can't be included in their deck. And it doesn't count against their 30 cards, but each player always has exactly one of these. As for the various tokens of the game, each player has 9 life counters that they keep off to the right of their deck. Each player also has 3 boost counters that they keep off to the left here. There are 5 action tokens, deploy, support, tactical, event, and bonus, as well as 3 command tokens. And of course, I'm telling you to put the life tokens off to the right and the boost counters off to the left and everything. I mean, ultimately, this is just a suggestion. I mean, really, you could keep your boost tokens down here if you want to, but this is the preferred setup for the game. We also have some damage tokens and extra D12s and stuff just kind of floating around. To start the game, each player is going to draw their starting hand of 5 cards. Then they each have the opportunity to smuggle cards. It's something that you do before the first turn of the game and actually during transition, which is between turns, and it actually works a slightly different then, and we'll talk about that more later, but that's where you can take however many cards you want from your hand and smuggle them to the bottom of your deck in any order. If it's the first turn, you then redraw back up to 5 and start. Think of it as sort of a selective mulligan. There are 4 different types of cards in the game, and wouldn't you know it, I have them all right here. Why don't we zoom in on some of them to take a closer look. This is a unit card, and arguably it's the card that you'll be playing the most. These are basically your ships that you're going to put out onto the board and move around and attack with and all that fun stuff. Cards always have a name, a main type, and a subtype down here. They also have a strength value, which is the amount of damage it will inflict when it attacks successfully. They have an armor value, which is basically the unit's health. If it takes this amount of damage or more, it is destroyed. And they also have combat modifiers on them. So this one over here will get +1 on attack, and over here it gets a +1 on defense. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about combat. Lastly, a lot of these cards have text right here, which is basically a special ability for the unit. Here's a look at a different unit card, and while this one has different stats and different abilities, the biggest difference is that this card has a tiny little chevron right here, whereas the card that I showed you before it does not. And the reason for that is this is a class 0 ship, and this is a class 1 ship. And now we'll explain exactly how those differ later on. These green cards here are support cards. They're generally used to buff up or help your own units in some way. You may notice the biggest difference between this type of card and a unit card is it doesn't have any attack or defense value or anything like that. These cards, when they get played from your hand, they remain in play until they resolve, and then they get discarded away. What these cards do have that unit cards do not is credits. See these little diamonds down here? See how this one is colored in and these ones aren't? Well, that colored in diamond denotes that this card is worth 1 credit when it is in your scrap heap, which is your discard pile. So even though you play this card once and then it goes away, it's still kind of sort of doing something while it's in your discard pile. And you may be saying, Tom, what are these credits used for? Hold on, I'll feed you, baby birds. The yellow cards are the tactical cards, and they function very similar to a support, but they generally have to do with attack. So you see this one says, have an ally unit attack once, reset your tactical action. So when you play this card, it doesn't leave play until that is resolved, meaning until you have an ally unit attack once. And these cards actually, a lot of the times, do have modifiers. So for this attack specifically, you will get +2 on your attack roll. And lastly, these red cards are event cards. The biggest difference with these cards is they can be played at pretty much any time, and that includes your opponent's turn. Now on to how you play the game and really like what you do on your turn. You'll notice that every player has these 5 action tokens. They have deploy, support, tactical, event, and bonus. Those do correspond to the 4 different types of cards you have, with the bonus applying to any card. On your turn, you play cards from your hand, spending the action tokens that correspond to that type of card. So if I want to deploy this unit, I have to flip over the deploy action showing that I've used it. Now in this exact example, this card has a special ability that says deployment. So after I deploy it, it says, oh look, reset your deploy action, which is really, really good. Now I can play more cards from my hand if I want to based on the tokens that I have available. So I'm going to choose to deploy again. And I'm going to go ahead and drop this guy. And this guy says deployment, trigger another unit's deployment ability. So this unit's deployment ability is reset your deploy action. Man, I'm just deploying everything, aren't I? So I could, yet again, spend my deploy action to deploy another unit out into the drop zone. Now let's say I wanted to play a support card, right? I've got my support action available, so shouldn't I be able to just spend it and then play the support card? Oh, nope. I actually don't have a spot to play this card. There needs to be an open drop zone for you to play any card, not just units. Because remember, these cards, when they're played, they stay out in play until their effect resolves, then they get discarded. So they need an open drop zone in order to be played. Now there is still a way that I could play that support action. You may have noticed that each player has 3 command tokens. Now command tokens get played onto units, and that is commanding that unit to either attack an enemy unit or move 1 space. And that's 1 space in any direction, so I can move it here or I can move it here. It is important to note that no unit can be commanded more than once, so that would be a totally illegal move. Now that this drop zone is free, I can play this support action, which states move an ally unit 1 space towards an enemy unit. All right, look at that. Progress. Now that this card is resolved, it gets discarded to my scrap heap, giving me more credits. Now I do want to back up here and explain to you one rule that I sort of glossed over earlier. Remember I showed you this little chevron on this card stating that this card is a class 1 unit. What that means is, in order for me to deploy this unit, I need to have at least one other card just existing in one of my drop zones, in one of the areas that has a little chevron. So if the board was empty like this, I couldn't just play this class 1 ship. But since in that early example, I already had a ship out here, I could play this class 1. And now it doesn't even need to be a unit that's in this other drop zone in order for me to play this. It could be any card at all. Here's an example. Let's say I played this support action by spending my support token. It says, deploy a drone from your scrapyard. Reset your support action. Now this card is going to stay in play until its effect resolves, so it's going to be using this drop zone. Deploy a drone from your scrapyard. Now scrapyard is my discard pile, and drone is actually a subtype of unit. So this one right here, while it is a class 1, it's a fighter, but let's just go ahead and, for the sake of argument, pretend that this was a drone. So I would play this card, be able to pull this one from my scrapyard, and play it here. Now it's a class 1, and this card is currently taking up one of these drop zones. So via that rule, this would be a legal move, pretending that this was actually a drone. Then I would get to reset my support action. Then this would be gone, and this one wouldn't just blow up. It still gets to remain. There is one other type of action you can take on your turn that I haven't talked about yet, and that's your location ability. So we haven't talked about the location cards yet, because again, they're not going to be included in your deck. They're completely separate. But each location has 2 different abilities based on 2 different numbers of credits. So this one here says that for 5 credits, if I explore, I can draw a card. I'll explain what that means in a minute. And for 10 credits, I can reroll combat. So now we're getting back to the credits aspect of the cards that, aren't units. So if you'll notice in my scrapyard, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 credits. So I have a 5 credit ability here, and that 5 credits is really a threshold. I don't have to have exactly 5, I just have to have 5 or more in order to be able to trigger that ability. Furthermore, I don't have to spend those credits in any way. So I don't have to get rid of these cards in my scrapyard. Just the fact that I have 5 or more credits in there allows me to trigger this ability. Now that first ability reads, explore, draw a card. Explore is a keyword that means whenever you draw exactly 1 card. So if I were to draw exactly 1 card, I could trigger this ability to draw an additional card, given the fact that I have 5 or more credits in my scrapyard right now. Now let's say, for example, that I played this event card. Flipping over my event token, it says reroll combat or draw a card. I'm going to choose to draw a card. Since I just drew exactly 1 card, I can trigger this ability. And I'm going to go ahead and just turn it sideways to remind myself that I've already used it. and then I'll get to draw one additional card. And those are the basic actions you can do on your turn. And now there's no order that you have to do these in at all. So I could, let's say if I wanted to deploy this guy right here, and then I wanted to command this guy to move up, and then I wanted to play this support action, I can do them in any order and really as many times as I want to, or as that I am available to do based on the limitations of the tokens that I have available and the drop zones that I have free. And now let's talk about units attacking. So you can have your unit attack an enemy unit either by commanding them to do so or by playing a tactic action that allows them to attack. When you attack an enemy unit, you roll your attack die, which is a d12, and your opponent rolls their defense die, which is, a d12, and whoever gets the higher number wins. So the attacker, if they had the higher number, right here in this example, I rolled a 7 and my opponent rolled a 10. So he won this one, so nothing would happen. But if I rolled a higher number, let's say I rolled a 12, I would deal damage to him based off of my strength. So I have 175 strength, he has 200 armor, so I would deal 175 damage to this unit. If the amount of damage that I dealt was greater than their armor, well, I would have destroyed that unit. Now, of course, there's actually a lot more to it than that. You'll notice that each of these ships have an attack and defense modifier. So when I go to roll my attack dice, so right there I rolled an 11, but because I have +1 for my attack, that's actually considered to be a 12. It's also important to note that if this unit was attacking this one because of a tactics card that I had played, lots of these tactics cards actually have attack modifiers on this. So I would get a +1 for the ship itself and then a +2 for this tactics card. So this 11 would actually become a 14, which is pretty tough to beat. It's also possible for the defending unit to have a defense modifier. So this unit has a +1 on defense. So if they rolled that 9, it would actually be considered to be a 10. 10 is still less than the effective 12 that I had rolled in this example, so I would still win. And now there is no real line of sight rule per se. Since I'm adjacent to this guy, I can attack him no problem. But what if I was down here and I was 1 space away from him? Or what if he was back here and I was 2 spaces away from him? Could I still attack him? The answer is yes. You can attack any unit. You are just penalized for the number of empty spaces between you and that unit. Now, it is important that I said empty and between, because if you just do this, it's the number of spaces away, you can go, oh, well, I'm 1, 2, 3 spaces away from this guy, when really there are only 2 empty spaces between me and him. And now you always want to try and draw the shortest path too. Like I could say I'm 1, 2, 3 spaces, empty spaces between, but that would be silly. You generally want to do, oh, I'm 1, 2, because that's the shortest away and thus the lowest penalty. For every empty space, that's a -1 to your attack roll. So while I'm +1 here, since I'm actually, there's 2 empty spaces between me and this guy, I'm actually at a -1 for my roll. So if I were to roll that 11, it's actually a 10. It's also important to note that I did say empty spaces. So even if I really, really wanted to attack this dude back here, since these guys are blocking him and I can't count empty spaces to get to him, I can't actually attack him. However, if this card wasn't there, well, now there are 1, 2, 3, 4 empty spaces between me and this unit. So I could attack him at a -4. Well, then with my +1, it would be a -3. I could still totally do that. It would be a pretty big detriment to be at -3, but hey, live your life. Now, if after we both roll our dice and we add all the modifiers that there are, meaning the modifiers added by the unit, added by the tactics card, subtracted by the penalty of distance, after all of that, if those 2 numbers turn out to be the exact same number, that's what's known as a critical hit. In which case, the attacker destroys the targeted enemy unit, and it doesn't deal any damage. So if any cards say that it's damage resistance, or it doesn't matter, the strength or the armor or anything like that, it's just a critical hit, that guy is dead, sayonara. Now, if any cards were played to say end combat, that would resolve before the dice actually resolve, so that could cancel a critical hit. The last thing I want to talk about in reference to combat are these boost tokens. So each player has 3 of them, and they can be used when attacking. So here's the basic idea. Let's say I was attacking this guy, and he rolled a 10, which with his bonus is an effective 11 on defense, and I got close. Let's say I rolled an 8, right? So I didn't win. I didn't get to do any damage there. I lost. Well, again, since we all have these 3 one-time use per game boost tokens, I can only use them each once per game and only 1 per attack. And again, it's only on attack, not on defense. I could spend one of my boost tokens in order to roll an additional d12 and add that to the roll I already had. So, ooh, look, I got a 5. That's definitely enough to crush this guy. He did. It's also important to note that one unit cannot attack the same unit more than once. So let's say I want this guy to attack here because I got to play this tactics card that allows me to do it, and then I command him to attack here too. That would be an illegal move. The last thing I'm going to talk about is transition. And the transition stage is basically between each player's turns, where a few things happen, and it happens different per player based off of, whether you just ended your turn or if you were about to start your turn. Now, if we're going into transition and you're about to start your turn, what you do is, first of all, you will take 1 damage for every enemy unit that's in your territory. So if this player had moved their ship all the way up to here into my blue area, one of my 7 spaces, I would take 1 damage. I would lose 1 life point for that ship just being in there during transition. I would then reset my location and all of my action tokens. I would also have all of my commands back ready for use for my turn. And then I would draw up until I had a full hand of 5 cards. Now, if we went into transition and I was not about to start my turn, like I just ended my turn, what I would do is I would still lose the 1 life for having an enemy unit in my territory. I'd see this guy still here. I go, I'm going to lose another life. I would reset just my location and my event actions, because events can be played on your opponent's turn, and locations can be used only exactly once per turn, but yes, that does include your opponent's turn. Then I would have the opportunity to smuggle cards from my hand to the bottom of my deck. And now this is what we did at the very beginning of the game, but it works slightly differently here because the actual definition of smuggling is you take however many cards you don't want and you smuggle them to the bottom of your deck, which is called your armory, and it's in whatever order you want. But that's it. You don't redraw until the next transition phase when you're about to start your next turn, and then you draw up to 5. So the detriment to, you're cleaning up your hand for the next turn, but if you have some events in your hand that you kind of want to hold on to, well, you really don't want to smuggle those, do you? So that's kind of the give and take of smuggling. And now you win the game immediately once you bring your opponent's life total from 9 down to 0. Damage is taken for every turn when there's an enemy ship in a friendly territory. So just like here, when we go to transition, I would lose a life for having this guy here, and my opponent would lose a life for having this guy here. Now, if I did have 2 guys in his territory, he would lose 2 life. Also, whenever a friendly unit is destroyed, life is taken. So if I were to attack this unit right here and kill it, he would take a damage here. And the last way you could take damage is a bit of a rarity, but whenever you're drawing up to 5 cards during transition, for every card you need to draw but can't, you'll take a damage. So I have 2 cards in my hand. I have to draw up until I have 5 cards. So I draw 1. I'm supposed to draw 2 more, but I don't have any more cards left, so I'll take 2 damage. In that example, I just lost, and my opponent won. All right, nerds, there you have it. That's how you play Victory Battle Tactics. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments down below. I'll be sure to get to those as soon as I can. And hey, while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you'll never be bored. If you have any questions, be sure to put those in the comments down below. I'll go and delete them, and I won't have to do anything. It's like they're not even there.